Good morning. I think while we are waiting for others to come in, thank you so much for being on the panel 2 on day 2. And if any of you were there in the first panel, it was very engaging, and we wanted to take it up a notch from there. And the topic today is emerging technology trends and opportunities in federal sector. So before I call upon the speakers onto the stage, I wanted to share a few information to set the context. So all 3 of our panel speakers today are from Department of Homeland Security. And you know, the agency that's always a step ahead in terms of adopting innovative technologies. And I personally had the opportunity to work with all 3 of them through different programs, and I've witnessed firsthand, you know, how much of a championship they have done through the technology and have this help them to power the mission. So without any delay, I wanted to call upon the 3 panel speakers, Rob Brown, Andrea Villalba, and Scott Purnell Saunders. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.
I'll sit here. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for joining, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation right now. And before we start diving deep into the technologies, when we say emerging technologies, the things that come to our mind, blockchain, AI, MLOps, RPA, and you name it. But before we get into that, I just wanted to get your perspective on what it means from you, from the mission standpoint, and maybe a little bit of introduction for our audience about yourself. You can start with Scott, and then we can work it down.
Love you guys.
You're the star.
Of course, this is Rob. Everybody knows Rob. I'm Scott Purnell Saunders. I'm the branch chief for the Risk and Fraud branch in RNSD, which is Identity Records and National Security Division. We develop applications to support national security operations across the country, mostly in support of FDNS and RAO, which is fraud detection and national security and refugee and asylum operations. So I've been in CIS, what, 5 years? Yes, for a while. And generally, I look at AI and ML as kind of the next stage in our advancement. We deal with a lot of data. Everybody wants all the data, all the information. And AI and ML give us the ability to see it in a different light and move it faster than we can actually see it typically day to day.
How can I top that?
Good luck.
I'm Andrea Villalba. I work for INA. I am the director for IT strategy and portfolio management. Currently, our major focus is really moving INA into the next level of technology and also process. So right now, INA is responsible for all of the ops for CLAN and all of the TS, SCI level information. So we do a lot of application development, but we also manage all of those services. And so we do want to start to become more innovative and do these things. So right now our focus is to start to create that strategy for the next 2 to 5 years so that we can get there.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rob Brown. I am the CTO at USCIS. I'm here to support Scott and the rest of USCIS, really, as best I can. And some of the innovative things I think that we're trying to do, besides the blocking and tackling of peopleware, and supporting Scott and everybody else, is trying to help establish some relatively innovative standards and levels of governance, applicable, I believe, to the audience here. Yeah. When a new contract, or even if you're existing, you come on and you're like, so where do I go? Where do I start? And how can I be productive on day 1 or even a month later? So we've actually been working, one area of, just to bring up, is working on essentially a developer user experience, so that when folks do come on board, they can see the ecosystem of services that we have, either from a serverless perspective or microservice, the actual platforms that exist so they can quickly adopt and get onboarded, as well as some of the standards that we have in place as it relates to integration, coding standards, pipeline standards, things of that ilk. We've actually been working with Spotify for the past, I would say, 6 months, and looking at an open source tool that they have exposed and trying to adopt that within USCIS. So it's been a really cool partnership working with that crew. They're a pretty interesting group. And that, to me, the outcome there is, so when Scott needs folks to be, post-EOD process, ready to roll, they have the suite, the entire ecosystem. They've got the EA landscape. They have the tools, as opposed to, Scott or, going to some other branch or even some other division, figure out where do I go? So that's, I think, a pretty cool area that we're working on. And that just ties into a lot of, what are the data products that we have there? What are the CI/CD for ML? All of this can start to be captured in this cool ecosystem of tools that make people work faster, easier, and then folks can also do essentially pull requests to all of these sort of catalogs of services. So pretty cool stuff.
Great, great. So let me piggyback on that. So these are the cool services, cool applications you guys are building right now. But in the next 3 to 5 years horizon, I'm actually talking from the small business side of it. Always, as business owners here, we always have that one thing, that passion and then the technology, but then that's not the end of it, right? There's another large portion converging that with the mission goals. That's always an exercise, a journey, right? And this kind of platforms really help us. And so my questions are more geared towards, facilitating that, bridging that gap. From that standpoint, what are the next best emerging technology-related initiatives that are either it's challenges or the new initiatives that USCIS or DHS at large currently working on that you could share? We can start.
No, bye.
I love it. So, so to kind of piggyback off of what Rob said, we know that AI and ML are still kind of new-ish technologies, right? We haven't, in my mind, reached even, they haven't reached their strides yet, right? So integrating those types of technologies when you're looking at automation and staging and kind of developing hands-off technologies so that things work faster, better, stronger, and more consistently are kind of the ways we have to improve ourselves, right? So those sort of technologies are where we got to get to. A lot of our processes historically have been more manual-based and require hands-on keyboards and manual manipulations. But to point out to kind of what Rob was saying about standardization, if we standardize a tool set, you can standardize outputs, right? And you can get the same people working on the same things at the same time. Historically, I've seen our agencies generally are very siloed. You build your thing, you build your thing, you build your thing, and never the two or three shall meet, right? So that integration and standardization is going to be huge for moving things forward.
And Rob, I know we've done some cool multi-cloud strategy work, and I know you're working on the contact center as a service. If you want to add a little bit more, is that something, initiative that you're carrying it forward for the years ahead? And
yeah, we just look at it from a call center, throwing it out there of essentially 100% bot-controlled call center. That's probably audacious, but that to me would be great, and it's on a roadmap for like 2025. And I think the technology is here that we could probably even do that today. So that's one area, and I think from other areas is more from a cultural perspective, but in a product perspective is really data, and data as a product with the appropriate standards and the right definitions and dictionaries and things of that ilk. So a lot of that sort of stuff is being formulated now. And a prime example is just getting ground truth data sets that can be leveraged over and over again and built upon for the onslaught that we know is coming for these data products. Just one sort of blocking and tackling area to move out on. The other, I think that, if we're looking future, is I can see, and there's another conference coming up, I think in second week of November, it's the NVIDIA conference. Right. I can see us starting to do like adjudication, even risk and fraud, using augmented reality.
Absolutely.
And that technology is in our homes now. So we should be looking and at least have thoughts about it. But how can we enable our risk and fraud adjudicators? How can we enable just the guys doing the regular processing of benefits to get that data faster in that mindset, in that manner, as opposed to just the basic pre-processing automation. So that's some areas where I think we could spend some dollars and do some good thinking.
I mean, Scott, I know your FDNS modernization effort is such a large undertaking. Right? We have this high scalable DevSecOps platform and microservices that we're building in. What kind of challenges? It's a high risk, high reward.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I mean, you know, everybody talks about it, but you're driving an 18-wheeler trying to jump from one to another at the same exact time, right? You can't run off the road, right? People talk about the trains and all that, but you have to literally control what's happening and you control your speed, and it's difficult, especially when technology changes every day. But we're not building products that people can kind of just look at, right? We're building things that actually impact and affect people's lives. So we have to understand the real importance of that. And when you're doing it, it takes, you know, really a lot of time and care, and understanding that sometimes we can't do the most aggressive thing. It has to be repeatable, it has to be scalable, it has to be reliable, and it can't always be the newest, shiniest thing. And that's a hard thing to, you know, get some people to understand, right? We understand the technology's here, we want to get there, but it's got to be repeatable and it's got to be scalable across the agencies, and in areas that don't have the greatest technology access and whatnot. And some of our, you know, officers may not have the greatest technical aptitude either, right? So you have to develop it for a multitude of paradigms. So I think understanding that and, you know, building out systems and situations that can be universal to all have been very difficult. Moving from prem to cloud, as we talked about, the multi-cloud piece is going to be huge, right? And not tying ourselves to one particular vendor so that we have some diversity is going to be hugely helpful. I mean, because we don't want to lock ourselves into one cloud, because that's the same problems we have with one data center. What happens when your one cloud goes down? So you got to have reliability, you got to have scalability as well.
There was a lot of lessons learned, I think, for the first few years for the risk and fraud portfolio as we started working through that, especially not just the technology changes, but the people change and the mission changes. So now you're constantly having to build to the requirements change, right? So not only does that create, you know, a need for that flexibility, but the system has to be able to scale out, and you have to be able to change it, and it has to adapt. So all the best ideas, if it doesn't fit what the mission space is, and you didn't think for that change coming, now you're rebuilding again. And these are all some of the huge lessons learned that we kind of went through initially as we started thinking through the modernization of some of those systems. And they're still in process right now, probably still going through the same challenges.
Is that more on the adoption or the upskilling, or where is that?
Well, I think that's the delicate relationship that has to be between the customer and the IT shop, right? And so you have to think forward, not just about your technology. Now you also have to account for the changes in the mission, what's happening, paying attention. Is there something else that we're going to have to account for in this system that they may not know yet, right? Because sometimes when you marry IT to business, something magic happens. Right now you have two different types of perspectives, and from an IT perspective, you can kind of see what the business is doing, how they're operating, and because you have, you know, a IT background, you can understand what needs to happen, or how do we automate this, how can we do better, how can we make it more efficient, things like that, where the business may not know that because they've been doing it the same way for so long.
Yes. So I think to add to what Andrea was saying, it is not a us and them. It is an us, right? It is, and it is a universal we, including all of the people that provide support to these operations, including those who will be the recipients of those systems as well, right? And the use of those systems on a day-to-day basis, and the outcomes that produce from them. It is hard to kind of take that approach, though, because everyone thinks about it in their particular way, and it's always worked this way, and it's always had to be this way. But just because it always was that way doesn't mean it always has to be, or will continue to work that way. So I think one of the major, advances that have happened in the last few years wasn't just the modernization of the systems, it is the kind of modernization of the thought process, right? So you guys don't know, Andrea and I used to be coworkers. Like, started the first day, same day at CIS, same table, same orientation, same branch, same everything.
Did you guys get a whistle too?
We did not get a whistle.
I have a whistle.
She has a whistle. I did not have a whistle. But literally, like, almost working side by side for a while, and then kind of diverged, right? So she pivoted kind of more into the business side, but had the IT understanding to really bridge that gap. And people always ask, well, how do you do that? I was like, we're all working towards the same goal, right? We're trying to build the systems that the business needs to get the operations done. And the business is trying to communicate to us so they can get their needs met. So we're all just one big family. At times people lose sight of that. So as long as we can really keep that together, including with everybody in the room, understanding that it's mission first, I think we can make
So
it.
let's include the industry into the family. So
Absolutely.
in that,
We
You're
don't-
included in that week.
It is that, because if you guys aren't contributing and aren't with us in this, we're not going to get there.
So taking that point a little further, it might sound like a broad stroke question, but what do we need as a small business, particularly small business, need to do, or any advice in terms of bringing in the technology, and then we probably throw a white paper. There's a lot more to be done there, and maybe you can teaming with the right companies, or maybe setting up a lab, some kind of advice in that sense. If you could give your perspective, what more can small businesses do to firm up their position and come there with a solid delivery model?
Srini, if I had to give a theme for the next couple of years and what it should be, it would be people and understanding where we are in all of the organizations. So yes, it's DHS. However, each component functions differently. And some of us are further along than others. And so when you come into the DHS space, you can't expect to treat every component the same. And so my challenge to you guys would be to do your homework. Understand the agencies and the organizations that you're coming into and the challenges that we have, because you can bring all of the best technology, but if we're not able to keep up with that via process and people and skill sets and policies, then that technology is going to be as good as a paperweight. So it's really understanding, how do I come into this space and get them to where they need to be, right, in a partnership? Because when we bring on contractors and this type of support, we're looking for leadership, we're looking for smart people, right? So we don't want you to come in, so we're just like, do this, do that. We want you to come in and help with those conversations, give us ideas and solutions, and not just be there to, take orders, but really help lead. How do we do this? How do we get there? We talk about all these great technologies, and they are great, but we're not there yet. And if we can't get there, then none of those things will matter, because in 2 to 5 years, those technologies are going to be out the window, and we're already into the next greatest thing.
I would add, you're spot on, like it is people. Part of that, I think, is how you structure the people. What does that look like with a product mindset, just to even go a little bit further back to that integration of business and IT, and IT is not subservient, as I think a lot of organizations think they are from a business perspective. So it's ensuring the leadership is in place, and also having the right partners, small business or otherwise, that have that same mindset, that it is a partnership with the folks that understand the business. And then from a delivery perspective, understand what the hell the problem is. Because a lot of times you're just ripping off JIRA tickets, not understanding what the hell you're doing. And so now you've just created technical debt, and it's just a mess. So, understanding what the real problem is, having those good discussions with your POs or whatever, or your product managers, makes a whole lot of sense. And then back into how do we, small business, become more successful? I think it's starting to experiment with that sort of that team topology, thinking about cost, thinking about the newer ways of doing business, of leveraging platforms that reduces, that undifferentiated heavy lift or cognitive load, so that the folks, and ideally the skilled, smart folks, are just working on those hard problems. And so how do we bring that in, and how do you get exposed? Maybe it's at some of these events, instead of it being a lot of talks, perhaps you do have a hackathon, or you have some demo days to showcase some of the technology that is applicable to some of the challenges that exist, targeted to something like a DHS or even a component, or maybe it's something like Zero Trust, where you have some really innovative, cool thoughts that you can illustrate to the community, and all of the, both small business and the federal community. I think that would be pretty awesome.
Can I take this a little further? And I hope I'm not stepping into the contract side from programs, but a lot of times the procurement, when it takes 5-6 months from the time the proposal drops and it sees the award, right? And if there's a tech challenge, core challenge, things like that involved, small businesses, especially smaller, they're nimble, they're strong, but then probably it's cost prohibitive for them to stand up these environments on cloud and have these folks, 10, 20 people on the site as a tiger team to do that. So I'm just proposing or suggesting, I want to see how you guys take that. Why not a cross collaboration between government and agency? You set up, provide a sandbox and have them do it. And it actually helps in the greater good. So if it works, it's great. Even if it doesn't, that's IP that you own and you could utilize. What do you guys, what are your thoughts on that, Scott? I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I was like, he's lobbing it up, right? So there's a, procurement innovation is a process, right? Like it's not just a statement. It is not just a singular thing. And I, for one, really believe in it, right? So understanding that it costs you money to compete, it costs us money to compete too.
Why not we share?
Like significantly
Time
so.
and stress.
It costs us money, like a lot of money to be in those. So you're coming to us with your proposals and presentations, and you're like, it's going to be 5-6 months, and we're on the other side like, it's going to be 18 months because it takes all these processes before you actually ever see anything. So being able to streamline those things so that it's a lot more efficient for everybody is one of my goals, right? So I'm having conversations personally with folks on the team to be like, this can't be, we can't keep repeating the same processes over and over again. Like you can't keep doing the same thing that hasn't worked year after year after year. So we have to figure out ways to develop, teaming, right? Can you build out, more vehicles that offer some flexibility with multiple awards? I mean, there was one that released recently that I shall not name that really took an innovative approach to how you would deal with awards and teaming. That folks are really kind of like, that's an interesting approach. That is one that folks are looking at as how can we take this and integrate some of its pieces into what we're doing and then innovate off of that. So the hackathon piece we were talking about, we talked offline. That's why I said he kind of lobbed it right. We had spoken about it. I have a vision for the future where we can do one of those things, right? Like you get your stamp of approval. Everybody comes to the pool. We got a week. You come in, you bring your best guys and gals and folks that want to particularly compete. You bring your best, whoever you got, your A team, right? They compete. If you are successful, you get your certificate for that particular time period, whatever that time period is. And then you are then qualified to do that. So we don't have to keep rerunning technical challenges over and over again. And it points to what Rob is talking about with the standardization of onboarding and tool sets and equipment so that this program is doing it this way and this program is doing it this way. If everybody competes on the same platform and is doing the same thing, we can hire what we need to meet the mission.
Great. I mean, so this is across the components within the agency, but what about the collaboration across agencies? I know, Scott, we worked on that. I think that's probably between CBP, USCIS, and State Department, I guess, especially during the COVID contact tracing data. You want to talk a little bit about that on the Snowflake cloud platform?
Yeah, it's very a passion of mine right now, just understanding a lot of the challenges that Scott has and a lot of other, not only on the business side, but even just on the technology side, the challenges in just getting the right data and getting the data in a timely manner. And to be frank, the majority of the protocols that exist today, technical protocols, are they're antiquated. I'll go into specifics, but they're very antiquated. And they're frail and brittle. And so establishing and almost leapfrogging, ideally, existing protocols and thinking about new innovative protocols that can be leveraged from a data perspective, or let's say a data lake perspective, where I'm not doing a standard SFTP or some nonsense like that, where I'm talking about zero copy, where the people who want that data can get it quickly with the right access controls. Even just recently, newer tech with Kafka and doing topic mirroring. And of course, there's just standard sharing my S3 bucket, but there's a lot of sort of overhead with that. So coming up with a common protocols that are easy to use, and I'm not tied to a specific technology or vendor like Snowflake or Databricks, or put in whatever you want. It really can be agnostic from a sharing perspective, and then a consumption perspective on both ends is definitely something we're continuing to work on and have actual production POCs underway. And that's just from sharing, let's say, like a Spark data frame. The next is to start really sharing events so that I'm creating triggers in my organization that everybody else can now receive or consume, so that they're actionable ideally in real time or relevant time. So that's some of the data sharing that's actually happening right now between at least DHS components and working towards expanding that out to like DOS and a lot of our other partners.
Great, great. How happy are you guys with the support coming from small business now? What recommendations you can give, especially on the technology, the skills from both sides? I would say, there's a OMB statistics I've seen last month. The still federal government is trying to upskill about 400,000 people. That's 20% of the workforce, right? So government is doing their part, and are you seeing it's correlating with what on the industry, or you expect something different? And because we're talking about all these new cool technologies, but then if they are, number one, the knowledge and the skills, because that's going to be something that come back and bite if you don't have enough workforce manpower on that goes into the challenge that I'm talking about. But then apart from that, there's a lot of, Rob, you mentioned quickly, right? When we say something quickly, then are we the security aspect of it, or the usability? There are a lot of other things that could really elevate. We can actually use this latest technology, but I wanted to see, what you're seeing from small business community right now coming to you, is there a play, is this something that we could do different, or you want to tell, hey, these are the technologies you need to learn or you need to come back with in the next 2 to 3 years, converging with our initiatives that we're going to do in the next few years? So I know it's a loaded question, but
Well, I think something important to take away would be really getting your hands wrapped around talent pools. So we're not just pumping out these really smart people overnight, right? So you have a limited amount of folks here in the DMV area. It's the same people recycling through all of the agencies, right? And so I think the talent pool is going to be very, very important, especially when you start talking about getting into some of the agencies that require clearances and things like that. That's where we start to see diminished skill sets. At least that's my observation over the last year, going from USCIS, where we had really top-notch, I mean, these were like really smart people. We worked with a lot of great developers and architects and all these folks that came in with all these amazing skills, but they're uncleared. So there's a bigger talent pool available to pull from. When you transition into an agency such as INA, now we're talking about a smaller pool of people who have TS clearances or higher. And so the skill set, right? That skill set, I don't see that it's at the same level. And I think there's opportunity there that if you do have those types of contracts, it's important not to get comfortable. You can't take us anywhere if you haven't learned anything new. And so really making sure that the staff that you bring on actually have the skills necessary to make that mission successful. And that starts from the program manager all the way down to the developer, to the business analyst. These people need to be very skilled in upcoming methodologies, in agile, in different development. I mean, they need to know all these things, not come into our space and now we have to teach them. And that's what I'm seeing.
Thank you. For example, multi-cloud. We have architects on AWS. Now we need to bring in Azure certified, as well as the RPA. I think a lot of these initiatives, I see them bot driven. So if there is something that, hey, it's not, we have to be agnostic with the tools, but then the technology, we need to have yourself up to date on those things. So is there any specific direction that, I'm looking at Rob here.
I'm looking at Scott.
And I'm looking at Andres. I mean, I think when you, to piggyback off of what Andres said, and to frame it differently, I think it's understanding that, like, we talk about Agile as a development, like, and as a framework, right?
Right.
We want to be Agile, we want to be this. But I look at Agile like, when I was a kid, I played football, it was like, that is an Agile running back. It was like, he can't be tackled. He can get through these holes or things very effectively, because he was adaptable, right? He understood what was coming, and kind of could predict what may be on the, in the next, the defensive back was going to do, and he was able to juke and do something different. That's how I look at how technology has to be, right? Like when you talk about being agnostic for tools or other things, I'm like, the problems are the problems. It doesn't matter if you got a Stanley hammer or a Black & Decker hammer or whatever, it's still a hammer, right? So it's understanding how we want to solve that particular problem, and we can find the tools to get there. So it's about having the right people that are actually really good problem solvers, right? So kind of what Andrea was saying, if you have cleared folks that aren't necessarily keeping their certs up, work to get better partners, work to get people that can solve these future discoveries. And understanding that, no offense, we don't know everything, right? Like I'm the first to tell you, I never walk in a room and I'm the smartest guy, right? And we ask and we look to you guys to kind of provide us some of those insights that we're not yet able to see. So you can kind of help to develop some of those roadmaps just by bringing us good ideas that are different and innovative than we might not have necessarily seen. So you have the ability to have more hands and ears and eyes out than we do. So certainly, use us. You can reach us, propose some things like you were talking about, the hackathons and other things. Start to bring us those new and emerging technologies. Like, who'd have thought CIS is connecting with Spotify? That's really, like, of course, right? Like we talked about Netflix and the Chaos Monkey, right? And those sorts of things where you can look at technologies that come from other spaces that in general just solve different problems. So we don't always know all the things that are out there. So certainly your ability to be able to adapt to those things quickly and be agile in the real world helps us to kind of develop those things as well.
Well, I know we are running out of time. We have to leave some time for the Q&A, but one question on specifically on blockchain is USCIS seeing any use cases in utilizing blockchain technology at all, or am I touching something?
I think we can talk about it. Yeah, we are, absolutely. One of our initiatives is like a digital green card and using decentralized IDs specifically, and the blockchain technology is part of that ecosystem of solving some of those problems and really offering a new, better way of service for our customers, giving them a better experience, making things faster. So think of it being manifested in a digital wallet.
Cool. Thank you. I think we have 10 minutes. I'm going to open up. I think it's Andrea, Mahesh.
I know, I was going to say, don't give him the mic.
Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning.
I will not target the question to you, but good discussion and conversation. Yeah, for the whole panel, Scott and Rob also. The question is very simple. Throughout the panel conversation, it's come through that there are uncertainties on the side of buying on the government, but also uncertainty when small businesses apply. Now, harmonizing the onboarding is a very good idea, but prior to that is selection process. And if there are, as Srini pointed out, if from applying to getting accepted, if there is a long delay and technology challenges come up and coding challenges come up, is there some standard mitigating approach to reduce that problem for small businesses because they are totally constrained in resources?
I think it's something that we are willing to entertain. I think it's stuff that we're still thinking about. When you talk about the acquisition process and things like that, it's very challenging. You guys only see a partial piece of that red tape, but on our side, there's so much more. I think for small businesses, I think this is where it's going to become very important to really partner. There are a lot of very large contracts out there. However, you really have to kind of ask yourself as just a small business alone, whether you're really prepared to take on that contract, right? So it sounds wonderful. You want to win this contract for 70 employees. Now try staffing that for 70 employees and staffing that in 90 days. Right. So I think it's being realistic, and these are really great opportunities, I think, for the businesses to get together and really understand how to be successful. And that, I think, is going to come from a lot of the partnerships that you guys do with each other. And then on our side, it's something that we'll definitely take back and have those conversations.
Thank you. Sounds like what I'm hearing is that not only be prepared with your own application, but also build a good network.
Absolutely.
Events like this. You go ahead.
So I want to touch on something that Andrea had mentioned, but it is for the group as well. And one thing that I'm familiar with and that Robbie were speaking to earlier, USCIS and DHS as a whole has made a big push compared to some other agencies in terms of how to better serve the business through IT, right? That product-based approach makes sure that the IT team is much more aligned with what the business needs in those processes so you can serve and deliver faster and better. But there's still a core question to how, that a lot of agencies are constantly trying to solve, and I'm assuming from a USCIS standpoint, it's even bigger because you're handling a very, not just a constantly changing topic associated with the mission, which is immigration. The regulations are constantly shifting. COVID especially made some big changes. And then, from a DHS level, security, positions for the United States is also a big change. So how do you not only make sure that you're serving the business, but build in change into the product to ensure that you're going to quickly be able to shift, right? Because you could spend months building one tool out. Rob's laughing because I know one of them that he had to deal with this on. Maybe more than one, but I'm just going to, yeah. So how are you trying to solve that? Because that's almost the hardest part. And I say that because you were speaking a little bit of how do we build that into it up front.
Well, I think that this is one of those things where I know for us right now, we're not where CIS is. CIS is, we want to get there. They're still trying to work towards where they want to get to. So they're still, but they're further along than where we are right now as a component. And I think for us, the way we're going to get to that point is really starting to tighten up our processes and create more automation so that we're not constantly putting out fires and we have more time to think and strategize about what we need to do. Working with the customers, understanding what's happening at their mission point, and then being able to say, well, what is that going to look like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? And then also aligning that with the technologies we use so that we're not like cornering ourselves for something that we know is not going to scale just because it solves the problem. It may be perfect for that one problem, but then are we going to have to now build another app for that in like 6 months or a year because something else comes up? We got to stay ahead of it and really think about what that should look like.
I mean, I think another way to look at it is we are working modularly, right? So it's not about building these monolithic things that cannot be added onto and cannot be expanded, and trying to figure out where we're going to go in 3 to 5 years. So I tell people, some point back to the original question about, modernization that I engaged with FDNS. I brought everybody I could in the room for a couple days, obviously pre-COVID, right? So like we had 40, 50 people in conference rooms for a number of days to say, you tell me whatever you want. Like it, love it, hate it, it's trash. Like I'm not offended. Like, well, Scott, it's your system. I wasn't here 15 years ago to build it. I'm trying to build the next version of it, right? So the only way we get there is if we get everybody integrated to find out what your wants and needs are. And as those needs and wants change, we'll make iterations and integrations to that, right? So you start to develop platforms that can be flexible to that. We understand the missions change, like we see it all the time, right? And there are times where, a pivot needs to happen to support something else. But that's about building and developing these scalable applications that can be moved and shifted and pivoted when necessary. So it's not about being wedded to one single technology, right? So when AWS East goes down, we need to be somewhere else. Like if we prepare for hurricanes all the time, like we live in Maryland, right? Like, but we're worried about our data centers that sit in that part of the country. So we're always constantly thinking about ways to diversify and allow ourselves to be flexible as best we can. So everybody kind of knows, I got some folks in here who kind of know me from projects, and I say, it is not either or, it's yes and, right? Well, do you want this or this? Both. And they're like, really? I was like, find a way, because we don't necessarily know if we can get there, and if it becomes cost prohibitive or technically challenging, we can figure that out later. But let's develop on both of these, because both could be useful, supportive in the future.
I wish I had a whiteboard. Honestly. But it is. A lot of it is there's the people part, but from the change, it's what is the lowest common denominator? What can you decompose to that's a unit that's reusable? And that's within your code, that's within your business rules, that's within your workflows, and then that's something. And there's a level of it being decoupled. So we do have some successes. For example, in just leveraging a JSON and building that JSON that is in discrete sort of what is the lowest common denominator of that JSON to build, let's just say like a benefit type or an intake form. So that's one area of success. When things change, I just have to go back to that, whatever that unit is, and change it. But then you sort of move down the stack from building that application, so leveraging serverless or microservice technology, and making sure it's idempotent and it has a level of, again, being as best as it can decoupled, but also following the principle of one function, one service. Now I can either blow it out in a day or an hour, and rebuild it with that new functionality. So that where it gets tricky is in integration. And so trying to start to standardize and have that same approach to interfaces and the pipes also make it a little bit easier. So that's both internal and external. So, and then you go back to how do you do that work? And this goes back to standards. So ensuring that you actually have a proper standards on the metadata and the work that's being delivered across the organization. And then that can actually start to collapse all of that just based upon doing tag searches. I can see where the long poles are and delivering that product, and maybe even focusing resources, again, still based upon that metadata, and blowing it out or collapsing it to focus on that specific change. So the human work element, but also just the sort of the architectural element are some of the things that we are doing right now.
And all those things kind of start at the moment that requirement comes in. So this is where we start talking about that agile culture, that thinking, right? These are the types of things you have to start thinking about as soon as you see that there's a new project coming in, a new request, a new requirement from the customer, a new mission need. That's where you really have to start thinking from a technology perspective is, how do I not corner myself into just this one capability? And how do I make this versatile so that we can address other rising trends that come up and reuse it?
Thank you. Thank you for the insights. Srini, thanks for the right questions, the perfect questions from a small business perspective. But I have a question about, two parts to the question about your automation journey and your insights of how, when in the automation journey, when use cases come up from the business users, how do you identify and differentiate between low code and RPA? Because there's a lot of confusion about those two words interchangeably be used, and how that ties up to the AI and machine learning related use cases, the whole intelligent automation journey that encompasses. So the starting building blocks of low code, RPA, machine learning, and AI. But primarily, I want to know the insights from your perspective between low code and RPA specifically.
I'll take your lead.
Okay.
I was wanting you to go first.
Nope.
Don't be humble.
Nope.
So, being, especially after this past year and a half, having a more corporate mindset and resolving solvency challenges, we are establishing essentially an IT demand management process to address those business requests, that intake funnel, if you picture it in a diagram, that does go through a process, very similar to business. I've got an account rep who sort of shepherds and manages a customer, and this would be an internal customer, of course, to USCIS. Shepherd or partnered up with your sales engineer. The sales engineer works with that rep so that suss out all the requirements, and then we've established part of this process, or demand management is a technical advisory board, essentially a technical governance body that has the right skill sets and has actually representation across all of OIT to bring in those skill sets to essentially adjudicate those requests. Where does this belong? But not only that, but does it belong on Salesforce? Does it belong on ServiceNow? Does it belong in UiPath? Does it belong in Adobe AEM, or does it belong in Power Apps, right? So, and it's not just a one size fits all, and there's not a swim lane for each, because it does depend, and sometimes it doesn't fit there at all. It may already exist in something that's got built. And then it's like, all right, when we talk about, especially when we talk about sort of that pathway, do we want to start to enforce some of these standards, or move this from maybe RPA or skip RPA so we can go straight into a pipeline to deliver an AI or ML product. So that sort of quick high-level process is what we have been doing for over 6 months, and starting to get a little bit better at it, and get some data out so we can try and make it better. But that's the thought process, trying to be holistic and have the right technical governance body in place with the right representation to make those determinations. Do I have a checklist? No, and there's plenty that are out there. But at some point, maybe we'll automate some of it and have a higher level triage group so the process is a little bit leaner. But that's sort of where we're at right now.
And we're actually doing the same thing, but we're just not in execution yet. Right now, we are building out or revamping our governance process and building an intake process to do the exact same thing so that we can see all the, we have to have some way to really see all the requirements coming in and get our hands wrapped around them, because in big organizations like this, there's a lot of shadow IT that happens and efforts that go on kind of behind the curtains. You don't really know what's happening until something doesn't happen or something goes wrong, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, where did this come from? So we're also working on building out that intake process and that governance process as well.
All right. Thank you all. I know the clock reset twice, so we're over. Thank you for all the great questions. And I think USCIS has always been a smart, business-friendly agency and bureau, and I really love that. And I'm sure there's a lot of takeaways for us here. And thank you so much for all of your time. By the way, if anyone was not here yesterday, we had a nice gala, and Rob Brown was one of the recipients of the Elite Award, so you might want to congratulate him.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you
that.
so much.
Thank you guys so much for having us.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you want to
Run,
take a picture on that?
but oh, hurry up, 'cause I gotta run.
You said pictures. I'm like, oh, okay.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you, Rob. Just one picture, and then.
Are we all sitting down?
No, I think we have.
I was like,
We'll stand.
Are we standing up?
All right.
Go ahead.
That's okay. I would have caught you.
Thank you.